Hi, it's Michael Kerr here, presenting Small Business Banter. A healthy micro and small business sector means a successful economy and a more vibrant society. Small Business Banter is about helping regional business owners better prepare for current challenges, but also for the next stage of business success. I'm Michael Kerr, founder of Kerr Capital, advisors to business owners. Each week, I interview a fellow small business owner or an expert, and they share their stories, their lived experiences, the wins and the losses, and their best advice to help you, the listener, get the most you can from your own business. Small Business Banter is brought to you from the studios of 104.7 Gippsland FM and is heard across Australia on the Community Radio Network. And thanks also to Kerr Capital, supporters of the show. Hi, and welcome into another edition of Small Business Banter Community Radio and Podcast. Really pleased to have back for the second time Michel Hogan. Michel Hogan is a brand counsel, and she was in about September last year chatting about brand. So welcome in firstly, Michel.
Thanks. It's great to be back.
We had a great, free-ranging discussion last time, and I'm looking forward to this one. You and I chat a lot about brand, the impact on small business, and so I just wanted to let you, distill some of your thinking in the spirit of helping small business owners who struggle with a lot of things, and amongst them would be, how the hell do I, create a brand and do marketing and whatever. But could you just give us a bit of a recap on what you do, Michel, and then we'll get into some Q&A.
Sure. So the simple explanation of what I do as a brand counsel is I help people understand what they care about and how to put it to work. What that really means, if you get a little bit more technical on it, is when people have their purpose and their values, like what they care about, what matters to them, if you actually do things and make promises that don't align with those things, it's a risk to your business. So you're at risk when you make promises that you can't keep. And so when I'm working with organizations, it's always kind of through that lens of, what are you promising? And that's not a solely external customer facing thing. That's an everyone thing. So it's not just the promises that you make to customers, it's the promises you make to each other within the business, to your stakeholders across the board, including vendors and partners and investors and all people of all stripes. So it's a really whole system or whole org view, if you like, that I put into
yes, and I read, your stuff regularly. You're posting and writing for for publications, which we can talk about at the end. But this idea that a brand is, you'll say it better than me, but I take it as you make. Be careful about what promises you make because they make your brand. If you keep them and do a good job, is that so? What can you explain that a little bit more fully? That the concept behind your definition and concept behind a brand.
Yeah. So, brand is the result of the promises you keep. Is the way I define it and talk about it. And those promises are all promises. Like I just said, there's no category of promises that don't matter. And people say, well, what about the promises that you break? And of course, that's true as well. So if you're telling people you're going to do something, if you're making a commitment or an agreement or a promise or anything in that bucket, and then you don't do it, that also is contributing to this thing that I call brand, which is really a container is a way to think about it, right? So a lot of people talk about brand as this thing that you create. It's an entity of its own. I look at it instead as it's a container where everything that you do gets deposited. And so if you're making promises and you're keeping promises, and those promises are built on what you care about and what you on on that stuff like purpose and values, then you're actually accumulating value in this container, in this store that's called a brand. And if you're breaking promises or making promises that aren't aligned with what you say you care about, then effectively you're eroding that same value. And this is ongoing. This is something happening every day, all the time. It's not a project. It's not a thing that you come back to every now and again. It's literally all the actions and decisions of your organization are doing this all the time. And the goal is always, of course, to continue to accumulate value. And if you can, and when I talk about value, I'm not talking about money, I'm not talking about dollars. I'm talking about value as this thing of, like, if you like, energy that you can use to do more work. What do I mean by that? Great example. If I have a real strong store of value in this container, in this thing called brand, right, it helps me get more customers. The customers I have stick around. People I hire are more likely to stay. It's easier to hire people. I can develop new products and services more easily and put them into the marketplace. I can open into new territories. The goodwill and the reputation that forms, that sort of sits as part of that container, does a lot of work for me and expands as I use it. And similarly, if those things aren't true, if that value isn't there, it's harder to get customers, it's harder to hire people, it's harder to sort of start new products and services. And so other capital comes into play and fills that gap. So it's more expensive to run your business. It's like it literally costs more.
Yeah,
so this is a really different way of thinking about brand, right?
Yeah, but so yes, it's a store of value, but that value is exchangeable, for things of, as you say, it's not all about dollars or direct dollars. It's about, but a lot of those things you talk about can be measured probably, and we might come back to how you measure, what a brand is. But I want to start with, as someone, I run my own business, and you're constantly striving for to sustain the business. So you hear about brand, and then I think you say, and I want to understand more about why marketing, just what the stuff we did. We tried customer acquisition, we try, marketing and advertising and promotion, but none of that is really brand, is it, in your world? And doesn't mean you shouldn't do those things, but I think you're going to tell us how maybe it is a better way to go about your investment into those things.
Absolutely. So marketing is almost a de facto for brand these days. And I lose count of the number of times where I literally say, what if everything you know about brand is wrong? And just start there, because marketing in itself is an incredibly important discipline for an organization. Yes, you need to tell people about who you are and what you do, and you need to do that in a way that makes them want to actually learn more, buy from you, and keep buying from you. That's a fundamental aspect for any business. It's just not brand. It's one of the activities that contributes to this store of value, for sure. And how you do that and how you go about it will absolutely contribute to whether that value erodes or accumulates. So let's say, for example, as a marketer, or I make some promise into the marketplace where I inflate, where I hype what the product or the service can do. And then when the customer comes... Puffery, yes, that lovely term of puffery. And then when the customer buys it and it doesn't do that, right? So what's the impact of that? Well, that broken promise has a cost. And it has a cost of confidence. It has a cost of potential future purchase. It has a cost of reputation. It has a cost of of how you can do business with that customer the next time. And so without thinking, marketing needs to be thought about as a part of the overall organization. But it's not in and of itself brand. And it's, there's a lovely complex of organisations that have an awful lot to lose if they give up the idea of brand, right? So if they allow the organisation to own it holistically across everything they do, all of a sudden, as an agency, I'm stuck basically doing what I consider to be just marketing. I argue back, it's like, there's no such thing as just marketing. Marketing's really important. So is HR. So is product and service development. Like this, it's not a hierarchy or if you give up this idea that you own brands, suddenly you're not worth anything to the organization, right? I just find it a really strange sort of turf war that I quite often get dragged into because I effectively try and take people's toys away.
And I think brand, if I was to call it, I think it's kind of a pretty glamorous area of study or work. It's kind of like there's marketing or advertising, and there's branding. It's kind of much more existential or fundamental in the eyes of some. But is it? In our last discussion, we kind of touched on this, but do you need to focus on building a brand, or do you, or can you just go about what you do and the brand's going to kind of I think we talked about it growing around you. I mean, does it have to be a purposeful exercise to build a brand? Should owners get concerned if they're not thinking about it, or if they can't really figure out what their brand is?
Well, again, go back to what I was just saying, right? So brand is a store of value that is created by all the things that you do. So if you start there, so you can be deliberate about what those things are. You can be deliberate about what your products and services are, how they work, what their benefits are. You can be deliberate about who you hire and how they work for you. You can be deliberate about all manner of relationships and activities across your organisation, and every single one of those is a decision towards what the value is held in that container, in that thing called brand.
Yeah.
So every organisation, whether they are doing it deliberately or not, is achieving some form of brand. Now, is that what they want? Is the value in that store sort of conveying and made up of things that they truly care about, or is it something that just happened because they weren't paying attention? I think that's a better question, because there's no we're doing this or we're not. Every organisation is going about their business every day if they're going to stay in business. And so by virtue of that, yes, they're achieving, if you like, a brand.
Yeah.
The question is not are they or aren't they? The question is, are they bringing those things that they're doing together and essentially anchoring it into an identity of what they care about, and then carrying that through the promises they make and people's experience with them, so that what ends up in that container is what they want it to be? Or are they just letting that happen to them, and then whatever lands is what lands? And I think that's a far better question. The fun stuff that you sort of alluded to earlier, I call it bright, shiny object stuff. And it can be a load of fun to play around with the trappings of what most people think of as brand. Absolutely. But I'm like, this is my message, is that's not the stuff. The stuff that actually achieves brand and contributes to this store of value is really deeply boring, unheroic, unsexy stuff. It's how do we answer the phone? It's how does our logistics process work? It's how do we deliver what we say we're going to do? It's the day-to-day block and tackle of and that rumble of how you do business every day. And so I'd like people to get out of this idea of thinking about brand as this sexy, fun stuff, and actually say, no, that's fine. That's marketing. That's okay. We've got to make what we do attractive to potential customers, no questions. But it's no less brand to, as I said, to answer the phone or to enter data or to stock the shelves, as it is to figure out what the logo might be or the colours look like or what the latest ad campaign is or how our website operates.
Yeah. And that term unheroic work is the name of publication or a book that you've written, and again, we'll get that out at the end. But that encapsulates a lot of what I really like about the way you write and discuss and promote the idea of branding, and it's in those. You do it every day, and it's just all the grinding stuff. And in some ways, I think that's really kind of refreshing to hear, because you can make you do make a difference every day as you go about your work and engage with customers and employ staff. So yeah, it's really pleasing. And on today's edition of Small Business Banter Community Radio and Podcast, chatting with Michel Hogan, Brand Counsel. So I think we just got through that, some of that what is and what isn't branding. I wanted to just pick up on a couple of things that I really, having read all your stuff, some of the things that themes you throw around, you discuss, you write about, and I think they're really quite powerful. So, we talked about why marketing isn't branding. And then, so sometimes, you hear people talk about this idea, I need a new logo. So I want to throw it to you because, a logo isn't a brand, and it's certainly not going to make or break a business.
There's plenty of people who would argue it might, but I have a different view. So nobody cares what your logo looks like.
Is that so? That's what that might scare the daylights out of some.
You care. I absolutely, as a business owner, it's fine for you to care what your logo looks like, but don't conflate that with with someone who might buy from you really, really caring what it's going to look like. So beyond the obvious stuff of don't make a promise you can't keep. So the easy example is, if you're an electrician, probably don't have a logo that makes you look like a plumber.
Yeah. Okay.
Sounds stupid, but it's basic.
Make sure, on the truck or
make sure your logo just doesn't send completely the wrong message. But in general, people really don't care. No one's going to purchase your products and services or not based on your logo. Now, that's not to say that logo doesn't have a role to play. It does. Logos are how people pick you out of a lineup, and they become, if you like, a marker for all this other stuff that we're talking about over time. But that's over time. So the snazziest, sexiest, coolest logo on the planet will fall flat if what sits behind it is a joke. And the slightly clunky, more sort of bit old-fashioned logo will be an absolute hit if what's behind it is stellar, fabulous products and services that people come back for every single time. And that's just that's the hard truth of this stuff is it's only about all the logos come to mean something over time. When Steve Jobs first had the Apple logo developed, it didn't mean anything. It wasn't until it was slapped on a whole bunch of products and services that people loved that it came to mean something. Same with the Nike swoosh. So these are supposedly iconic logos that people look at and say, well, I buy it because of that logo. And I argue, no, you don't. You buy it because the product that the logo's on is something that you want and something that's cool.
Yeah.
And over time, they do become a bit symbiotic. But generally speaking, in the early days of an organization, or even for most small business owners, because you're not competing in a global marketplace, right? There's a point at which obsessing over your logo becomes a waste of energy, time, and resources.
Yeah. So maybe it's to a point. If an owner in the business and staff are really very proud or they connect, it means something to them. Forget about customers for a minute. Then that can be maybe a powerful reason to say, well, we do care about everything we do, and the logo is one of those things. So
sure,
yeah. So what do you? Then we had the myth of wow. This is kind of rambling a bit here, but these are really interesting big statements. They've picked out of a reread of some of your stuff. Talk to us about the myth of wow.
Yeah, this is a favorite of mine, right? Because it drives me crazy how people get trapped into this, what I call it, it's like a delight trap, where for some reason we've become convinced that unless we're absolutely wowing our customers all the time, then we're going to lose them. They're going to go somewhere else.
So
And
in numbers terms, is this when we hear this 150% when 100%, promised and delivered is just fine? Like I do laugh.
it is. It's an absolute. It's such a racket because there was a study done. Harvard Business has an article. It's actually called "Stop Delighting Your Customers." It's a bit old. It's getting a bit long in the tooth now, but I actually believe the message, what it talks about, holds up. Right? So there is a really big difference in satisfaction and its bedfellow loyalty to with customers between basically doing what you say you will do and not doing what you say you will do.
Yep.
So no big surprise there, right? You do what you say you do, customers are more likely to come back. End of story, right? But then there's this toxic idea that there's a equivalent jump, right, between doing what you say and exceeding what you say, like going above and beyond doing.
Yeah, that's
more
from 100
right?
to 150%.
Yeah, that's not, and it's just not true.
Yeah.
It doesn't hold up, and the increase is compared to the effort required to actually go above and beyond on a consistent basis, which, by the way, hardly any organisations are hardwired to do, is quite small. It's less than 1%. So you get a tiny gain from exceeding, right, from going beyond what you say. So I have a different message, which is set expectations and meet them.
Yeah. And so, then building an organisation and a team and a suite of products is, I think, a lot easier when you're building it to deliver what you set out to, promise.
Absolutely, yeah.
Right.
There's nothing wrong with, if you like, empowering people within your organisation should the opportunity arise to do a little bit something special. That shouldn't be against the law or against the rules of the org necessarily. You should do that. But codifying this idea that every interaction should go above and beyond what has been promised, I mean, it's toxic on a couple of levels. So the first way it's toxic is the effort required, as I've said, is ridiculous to do that regularly and consistently. But the other part of it that people don't talk about is the expectation. What my experience becomes my new expectation. So now you're stuck in an experience inflation game where whatever you did for me last time is what I'm going to expect you to do for me this time, even if you were going above and beyond what you'd said.
So that's when 150 becomes a new 100, right?
Exactly. And eventually you run out of room, right? Like there's just nowhere to go.
Yeah.
But the other part of it, the flip side of this, though, is making sure that you set expectations. And this is something that organizations are incredibly bad at. So we want to fudge. We want to hedge our bets. We don't want to put a line in the sand and say that's what we'll do, because it obviously says we won't do those other things. And lots and lots of orgs hate that. But the flip side is that when you don't say what you'll do and you leave that gap, you leave what I call like this vacuum of expectation, it will get filled with what I, as the customer, think you should do.
Yeah.
And that'll be based on my experience with other organizations who might have nothing to do with your business or business model. And so as soon as you're in that game, you doom yourself to failure, because not only won't you know what I expect until you don't deliver it, right?
Yep.
Even if you ask me, I probably couldn't tell you. So I think the really important thing for organizations to think about is, what can we do consistently and deliberately? Right?
Yeah,
what can we do?
Yeah, and you talk often about that. In fact, the little things are the big things. Which is, I guess your way of saying that. Probably both seen, some massive undertakings to rebrand, and take all these resources away and, redefine. And let's go back to just, what we're doing now and in the next 5 minutes and the next day and the next week. And
The other thing about that, though, that cracks me up as well is that it's the little stuff that we remember, and it's the little stuff that trips us up. So no one ever stopped going to a cafe because they didn't like what their business model was, right? But plenty of people will stop going to cafes because every time I go there, they get my coffee wrong. Right? Yeah. They give me the wrong order. Mm-hmm. And so it's when I talk about it's the little things, not the big things. It's actually little stuff beyond just that's where it shows up what we really care about, because it really does show up there. But it's also quite often the stuff that trips us up and becomes, it is where organizations quite often blow past. And you talk to people about why they left. Right now we're in a hiring Armageddon, right? People can't find people for love nor money, and quite literally. And you talk to people who've left an organization, and it's often an accumulation of little things that makes them leave. It's rarely one big thing. It's not that it's never one big thing, but it's more an accumulation. It's that no one ever said thank you. It's that I was never once acknowledged when I put in a bit of extra effort. It's all of these. It's this accumulation of little things. It's a bit like a marriage, really, right? So when does marriages blow up? It's when the plates are being hurled. It's not the thing we're throwing the plates about that actually led us to throw the plates. It's the 20 years that got us to the plate throwing, right?
Yes, it would be. It's that straw on the camel's back analogy, hey?
Quite literally, and that's where I come back to set expectations and meet them, and do that work. Like actually do the work to say, don't say to me, oh yeah, we'll deliver that. We'll let you know when we've mailed that or when we've shipped it. You should know roughly, and it's a bit hard at the moment with global supply chains. I get it, but if that's the case, tell me that, right? Yeah. Set expectations, and know very few people. Sure, there are some incredibly unreasonable people who will still have an issue, but as long as I know what to expect, most people will be okay. I mean, we do it internally as well all the time. I don't want to just make this about customers because it's not.
Yeah.
When we're dealing with our employees, for example, working with the team just last week, we were having this very conversation, and someone said, "Oh, I've got to get back to this person about this information." So I just said, "I'll get it to them sometime. I'll get it to them soon." And I said, "No, you." Take responsibility for the time for that expectation, and tell them when they can get the information, or at least give them a reasonable idea of whether it'll be within the next week or something. Well, and because otherwise they'll come back and say, "I've been waiting for this for ages." You make a
commitment, and you're not going, and you're not going to make the commitment closer to the date of the commitment. It's another opportunity to say, "Well, I'm not going to, I'm not going to meet that."
Own it. Well, and most people, right, if you actually take the time to renegotiate, if you like, on the agreement and say, and do it with honest intent, very few people will have an issue with it. Sometimes there are ripple effects that do make that sort of thing really problematic. But I would always rather that someone does that for me, and I've had plenty of even retail purchases these days where I'll get a note saying, "Hey, we're really sorry, we haven't forgotten about you. This happened, and it's going to, it'll be another week." And I don't have a problem with that. I can live without my eye cream for another week. It's okay.
Yeah. Probably. Yeah.
Probably.
Yeah. It's it goes to this whole kind of a lot of things are about talking and explaining openly, and it's hard sometimes. Again, none of us want to disappoint, but does this go to this idea of which customers you should focus on? there's a lot of pressure to win sales and to grow the business if that's what you want to do, or keep customers. But so are there, if you're clear on what promises you're making, does that parlay into trying to suss out how particular customers are going to be, so that you don't take them if you can't deliver on their terms?
I think you can to a degree, but again, if the clearer you are with your promises, and in setting expectations about what you can and can't and will and won't do, it really acts as a bit of a filtering device.
Right. So then
in a lot of ways.
They're coming to you because you've published or you've talked about or promoted a set of deliverables, and
that meets what they want, right?
Yeah,
and so they're not going to come to you if that doesn't fit. So it can help. It really can help filter out the fluff, and it's. And again, people get uncomfortable with that because, but they might have been a really good customer and it might. It's like, don't trade your mights for your ahs. Literally, don't. These people are good customers for you. They have responded to what you've said. They have accepted the expectation. They're excited for what you do. They care about the stuff that you care about. So don't trade there. Don't get all fluffy. And think that you'll be able to have it both ways, keep them and maybe get a few others who aren't potentially the right fit and don't care about what you care about.
Yes, and that Customerzilla. What is that?
Customerzillas.
Customerzillas, which is customization,
Customerzillas are literally the horror show of customers. Right, the Godzillas of customers. They destroy everything in front of them. And every small business has a few. The sad truth is that about 40% of your time will get taken up by about 2% of your customers.
Right.
And so there's a really good question in there of like, well, why are you keeping them?
Yeah, okay. This is what we want. We want, people, owners and their teams to be, aware of the customers that are good for the business and the business is good for them, and there are other customers who aren't. And
absolutely, and it seems like in this customer this experience economy that we live in, there's this really toxic guy. Again, I use the word toxic, but it is this little toxic idea that, oh my God, the customer is king and the customer's never wrong. And I say, well, yeah, sometimes the customer just flat out is wrong. And some customers behave incredibly badly, and that should never be tolerated. And some customers do get the rough end of the stick, and some businesses there's no we're good, they're bad on this. It's that there's a pretty good mix on both sides, if you like. But you've got to be deliberate and think again. You've got to think deeply about what do we care about, what will help us build and further what we're trying to do, and don't apologize for that. If I go back to one of my favorite examples of an organization that gets this right, and I never use the proxy. I don't call orgs brands. So you, as an organization, you have a container that's called your brand. It's not the org, right?
Yeah.
And so Patagonia is one of my go-tos in terms of the outdoor apparel company. And one of the reasons for that is they're unapologetic about who they are, right? This is who we are. This is what we care about. This is what we're here to do. You want to join us on that? You want to come along with us? We're here for you. We'd love to have you, but we're not going to turn ourselves into knots and tie ourselves into knots to try and be something we're not on the off chance you might like us.
Yeah,
better.
yeah. How long has Patagonia existed for? Has that been kind of consistent all the way through, or is that a case of evolving?
They've been, now I'm trying to. I should know the exact founding date of Patagonia. I think it was in the 70s, so they're about 40, 50 years old.
Right, so they got some
40 years old, but they didn't land there straight away.
Yeah, okay, that's the point.
They were a good 15 years in before they even could kind of articulate what the mission statement was. And
Yeah.
and then
And that's important to understand. You don't, I don't think you can just go, bang, this is what we do and this is perfection. And, it takes time. And that's, the genesis of a really significant brand that a lot of people know about. And, if not, and if you don't have the same aspiration to size and scale, it's still the same argument to start and evolve.
Absolutely. I think Patagonia always had at their core, they had some stuff that they cared about from day one. Their relationship to that and how they articulated it certainly grew and changed and deepened over time as they came to understand what they were doing better, and that I would expect. And that's true for literally every organisation I have ever worked with, that's true for. That deepening over time. Like quite a lot of orgs just start with what and how, right? They don't necessarily have a well-defined sense of, some idea of higher purpose out of the gate. That's a relatively new construct. And I say construct because generally I find it is a construct. It's not actually
I know
truth.
This whole thing of purpose. I want to kind of maybe just come back to that because you've got some things to say about that, which I'm really looking forward to hearing. But maybe if we could just on that vein or theme of conversation around, we could maybe wrap it up with what the secret ingredients or the key ingredients of a brand as a few dot points for someone to go away and not think of it as this. We've talked about it's a set of promises kept, and but are there any other things that are just components that can be locked away and help guide an owner in their day-to-day activities as an owner, running a team and building a business?
Yeah, I think there's really only two. And if you have these two things and understand them with any depth, they will stand you in good stead for everything that you're trying to do. The first of those is this idea of purpose, even though I think about purpose in a slightly different way. But really, it comes down to purpose is what matters most. It's no more complicated than that, and it doesn't need to have some kind of a social good attached to it or anything. It's just this thing that matters most to us, that motivates what we do and how we work. And then values.
And if social good was for someone, that's fine. You're just saying it doesn't.
That's fine.
It doesn't have to be. Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah,
I'm not saying you don't. I'm just saying it's not a given, right? There is this idea these days that purpose needs to have some kind of a social impact component in order to be legitimate. And there's boatloads of judgment around that. But it's just not true. Like, all it has to be is personally meaningful to the people in the organisation. It's not a marketing statement. And in fact, I encourage people not to publish their purpose outside, not to tell anybody, like to put it on their website, not to use it as a tagline or a slogan or anything like that. Keep it to yourself. It's nobody's business but yours. And it should show up again if you fully embrace it and you attack it with a real deep sense of commitment. It shows up everywhere anyway. You don't need to tell people what it is. It's obvious and visible. And the same largely is true for values. So again, values are so over. There's so much out there about values. I understand why so many people just are traumatized, probably quite often through the processes they've had to go through. And I have a real simple definition of values. All it is how we do things around here. That's it. Values are how we do things around here. And so again, once you understand what those things are and you put them to work across everything that you do, it becomes visible and tangible to people. You don't need to list them and put them out there again so there is a couple of things that people need, and that's really all that people need in order to do this work. And the first of those things is the purpose thing that you talked about before. But when I talk about purpose, I'm not talking about something that has to have a particular flavor to it or a particular bent. It doesn't have to have a social impact or socially good aspect to it. All it needs to do is meaningfully motivate you and your team and whoever your org. That's it. That's all. That's the job of purpose.
Yeah.
And it's not a marketing statement or a tagline or anything else. In fact, I encourage people to keep it to themselves. It's really nobody's business. It informs things that you might say to your customers and people out in the marketplace, but it shouldn't be that thing. There's very few organizations that can get away with using their purposes there as sort of as a customer statement, largely because, I mean, the big reason for that is it tends to filter people into trying to make the purpose sound bigger and more sexy than it might need to be useful and meaningful. The second piece around that organizations need are their values, and values are most simply stated as how we do things around here. That's it. And they contribute to culture in that values are how we do things and culture is that stuff done on repeat.
Yeah.
It's really no more complicated than that. And again, once you have a really good, deeply held, deeply understood set of values, you can put them to work across everything that you do and how you decide the actions that you're going to take and how you make decisions about things. So those two things put to work show up everywhere across your entire org, inside and out, which means you don't really need to talk about them because they're visible and obvious. And that's really when you know that you're onto something, when your identity shows up, not as a veneer and not as sort of some pastiche that you're trying to put together, but as a genuinely held foundation for who you are and what you do. And then those things, that sense of identity gets carried through into this landscape of promises that you make and how you make them and what those promises are. And then those promises show up as kept or broken in people's experience.
Yeah.
And again, it's a super easy way to think about experience that everybody goes on about is all experiences is where your promise gets kept or broken. So if I have a good experience, chances are a promise got kept. If I have a bad experience, probably got broken. Not universally true, but it's not a bad litmus. And then the accumulation of that cycle shows up in this brand, in your container of value that you call brand. And so as long as you have that foundation of purpose and values, you pretty much are good to go. It will shape what your products and services are. It'll shape who you hire. It'll shape how you operate, what your business model is.
Who you keep by way of staff. Who you keep
staff. What are customers you attract.
Yeah.
It'll inform your business model. And it interacts with the environment, of course, which is always changing.
Yeah.
And so it's a dynamic thing. It's not a static, like boring, just sits there like a lump in the corner. It's actually a really dynamic, when identity is fully realized in this way, it's a really dynamic thing. And it's not a thing that owes anything to the scale or size of the business. I have worked with very small businesses of a few people who have incredibly strong, deeply held identities that are really visible in everything they do. And in fact, I think we talked about this last time as well. When it comes to this stuff, small businesses actually have a leg up. They have it so much easier than large multinational, multi-site, multi-culture, 1,000 upon 1,000 person organizations, right? Because if you can see and if you can literally see and easily connect with every single person who works for you, this is so much easier to do.
Yeah, because a lot of that when you talk about values, that the way it's people that your staff that are going to be custodians, right, or the deliverers of that. And so, again, it comes back to, small business is an awful lot about people and the right people. And, Yeah. So as you say, and we were looking in the last chat we had about, the upside for small business, which we know that it exists, but we want to encourage people that the existing owners and the communities that depend on those small businesses that they do. It's not all. There's tons of challenges, but one of the things to flip around and think about is that maybe they're more adaptable and can kind of spread that message of purpose and values a lot more effectively. And so, I mean, there was a couple other things that I listed here. You had down as secret. I don't like the term secret ingredients, and probably you don't like it because it's not that. We have a bit of a formula or a menu or a recipe is the word I was looking for. But you had things like, thinking like the customer and talking to your customers as leading on to this term "ustomers," which it goes back a way. But I do. We've already chatted about the dangers of kind of trying to attract the wrong customers, but I think those are people that I know that run small businesses understand well that their customers are so important, and so the ability to engage with them and to understand them better is probably going to pay pretty big dividends.
Yeah, I'm always astonished at how few organisations do take the time to talk to their customers. Or their employees for that matter, or any of their stakeholder landscape. But in particular, I often see one of the reasons quite often when people change their name or change their logo, they say, it'll be a great opportunity for us to go out and talk to our customers. And it cracks me up every time because, if you're not already talking to them, you think they're going to care?
It's not an event to be scheduled,
It's not an event. Nobody cares. But perhaps you might want to just start talking to your customers because it's a good idea. And by talking to the customers, I'm not a huge fan of some of the ways that people do that these days. So you get a lot of. I don't know if there's an organisation I engage with on a regular basis that I don't get a survey from after every interaction.
Even before
from them.
or even before the Hades when the thing hasn't been resolved, and you're polling me about.
Yeah, absolutely.
I don't know if it's a successful outcome or not.
Yeah, and so this whole my favourite one is when I get a survey from Australia Post saying how did we do, and my question to them is, did I get my parcel? Then I'm good. Right, I got my parcel or not because you have literally and so you're asking me something and it's not the right question. They and
maybe the intent's right, perhaps, and
the intent might be right, but the execution's. But orgs do this all the time. I always encourage before you go asking your customers something, is it information you should already know? And the other cardinal sin that I think gets made too frequently is asking customers what I should do. So tell me what I should do. It's like it's not my business. What do you want? What do you want to know from me? I can't. My imagination will largely not extend more than a degree or two past what my experience with you is, and so it's not going to be particularly helpful if you're looking to transform anything. And also, it's your business, not mine. So,
you tell me what you do well, and if I need it, I'll buy it. Or
it's like, how about you do the work instead of asking me to do your job for you? And it gets wrapped up in this kind of strange wrapper of customer engagement, but it's not customer engagement. Customer engagement is effectively this. What I look at is the work to deliver what you say you're going to do and to follow up on that as appropriate and to encourage my further custom through whatever means makes sense within the landscape of what your purpose and values are. And instead of just this one-size-fits-all approach that's being pushed by a lot of these marketing platforms and a lot of these e-commerce platforms where everybody gets funneled into the same sort of set of steps.
Yeah. We've kind of almost closed the loop there a bit because we've come back to, what I take away from that is is again this the idea that be clear about, these are not your words, these are my interpretation, but be clear about what you do and why, and be careful about under delivering and over promising. So be good for what you said you would do, and to kind of continually evolve, be aware and accepting of the fact that these things don't just, brands are for whatever they are, they're around you, they're building, but you can shape it over time. And I get a sense that a lot of owners think brand is whatever they define it as, it is important to them, and it's important to all of us that you stand for something. And but I also just want owners listening to take away from that it's, you can do stuff about it every minute of every day, and every member of the team can do that. So think about it that way, and not necessarily about big splash marketing or new logos. And they're simple, things that we talked about. And it's not taking away from the fact that they're important, but maybe it's a good opportunity to actually think about what a brand is and how you can shape it by the minute. And that's a pretty powerful thing, rather than this massive project that's started. Next time I've got a couple of days and tens of thousands of dollars, or whatever it might take.
I often say if your brand's on your to-do list, it's in the wrong place.
Yeah.
Because I see too many orgs that have it as a project, right? Brand. We've got to do something about the brand.
Yeah.
And I was just like, why is that a project that needs to wait for 3 months until and has a however many $100,000 or $1,000 budget attached to it? I was like, sit down with your people, have a conversation. What are we doing well? Where are we keeping our promises? Where are we breaking our promises? Do we even know what promises we're making in the first place? Let's start there.
Yeah.
And have a look at that, and then look at there's easy measures that as a business, or you should be tracking as a business anyway, that can tell you an awful lot. Like how many people stay with you, how many leave from an employee standpoint, right? What's that look like? Same for customers. What's your repeat customer look like? If that's something that is true for your business. Not all businesses have repeat customers. Some it's a one and done, right? Or a one and rare. So that might not work. But how many if you are a business that has that relies on repeat custom, what does our repeat look like? How many do we have? Where are they from? How and just understand what the landscape of what you know about your business can tell you, and then look for crossover. Look for how, wow, okay, we started doing this. We didn't actually tell people what that would be, and as a result of that, we've seen a fall off in customers over the last 3 months since we put that in place. You can figure some of this out, and people say, but that's not brand. And I'm like, it is brand, because it's eroding your store of value, or it's accumulating your store of value. So stop thinking about it as this, again, divorcing it from marketing. It sort of almost requires deep therapy to get an organization to divorce these concepts, because they're so ingrained, and they're really, I've seen
departmental.
Oh, it's crazy. And I was talking to a startup a couple of weeks ago, and she was just beside herself at the amount of money she had spent on marketing and with agencies doing this work. And she didn't feel like she was getting any progress and making any gains. And we sat down and talked through this, and she said, why don't more people think like this? And that's a great question. I don't know, but I think a lot of it has to do with there's a lot of I feel a bit like a lone voice in the wilderness sometimes on this stuff, but if you can get your head around it, it's super powerful.
Yeah, well, it just sounds like you take a very practical approach, to, and also, in the spirit of the book Unheroic Work, there can be the really, fancy, complicated, involved solutions, and there can be other stuff that you can just get done. And again, to bring it back to a typical, or not a typical, but small business owners, because they're not typical, but they can embrace these things, and they can change things a lot quicker some of the bigger organisations, and that's what we want to encourage. So, Michelle, it's probably a good note to finish on. Before we do that, look, we might go around 3 in a couple of months' time, because there's a whole heap of things here that I think are really practical. But in the meantime, how do people get a hold of you, and what are some of the things you'd encourage them to read that you write? Books and articles and publications?
Sure. So I'm easy to get a hold of on all the socials. I'm just Michel Hogan everywhere.
And that's MICHELHOGAN.
Thank you. Yes. That's my website as well, michelhogan.com. And you can certainly easily get in touch with me through there. You can also on my website subscribe to my mail list, which is not a newsletter. It's an article that I write specifically for my subscriber list every couple of weeks, 2 to 3 weeks, when I have something worthwhile to talk about. And I only send people that. I don't use their addresses for anything else. So you can easily subscribe at michelhogan.com. I'm on LinkedIn, and most of my work eventually lands there as well. So that's an easy place to follow me. And I'm always happy to talk to people about this stuff and offer what counsel I can, and just give people this sense of that they own and control this for themselves. It's not something you need to outsource. It's not something you need to pay people a whole boatload of money for. It's literally the sum total of your endeavour. And I just think that's a lovely message for any size business, but particularly for small businesses who put so much hard work into what they do.
Yeah, here. So agree totally. All right, Michel Hogan from michelhogan.com. It's been great again to discuss these things with you. I really appreciate your time, and particularly your expertise and interest. And I'd encourage anyone listening I could well imagine people, throwing their hands up in the air when it comes to, a whole lot of things, especially something as, gooey and intangible as a brand. So, follow Michelle and take some of that on board. So thanks again, Michelle.
Oh, it's my pleasure, Michael, and thanks so much for having me. It's been a gas.
So that's all for today's episode of Small Business Banter. I continue to be inspired, bringing you small business experts and other small business owners and hearing their stories. If you want to listen to any past episode, jump onto your podcast platform of choice and search Small Business Banter. There you will find a diverse and fascinating collection of small business owners and experts openly discussing and sharing their experiences. For any of the links, resources, or information we've talked about on the show today, or to contact me, please head over to smallbusinessbanter.com, or you can find us on Facebook and Instagram. And it would be great to have you tune in the same time next week for another episode of Small Business Banter.